He called her used goods during a blind date. A single dad stood up for her. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday evening, the kind where hope flickers softly, daring to believe in love again. The restaurant on River Street glowed under warm golden lights, the sound of gentle jazz blending with the clinking of glasses and murmurs of conversation. Emily Ward sat at a corner table, her hands nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. She hadn't been on a date in years, not since the divorce. Tonight wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving to herself that she could still show up, still believe. She had spent the afternoon getting ready, not with vanity, but with care. Her soft auburn hair was pinned neatly behind her ears, her pale blue dress chosen by her best friend, who insisted it made her eyes look alive again. For the first time in a long time, Emily wanted to feel worthy. The man she was meeting, Mark Bennett, had seemed charming online. Confident, funny, the type of man who knew what he wanted. He told her he admired women who knew how to handle life. She took that as a good sign, even if something in his tone had felt performative. But she brushed off the unease. People could surprise you. Maybe, just maybe he would too. When he arrived, Mark looked exactly like his photos. Pressed gray blazer, a confident smirk, expensive watch glinting beneath the dim lights. He greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Emily?" he said, offering a handshake instead of a hug. "You look nice, more mature than I expected." The word mature stung, but Emily laughed it off politely. "Thank you. It's good to finally meet you in person." Dinner began pleasantly enough. Polite talk about work, traffic, and the unpredictable Georgia weather. Emily spoke about her job at the clinic and how she was studying online to become a nurse. She even mentioned her 7-year-old son Noah, her heart, her reason for rebuilding. Mark's smile faltered slightly. He leaned back in his chair. "So, you're a single mom," he said, swirling his drink. Emily nodded. "Yes, it's been just the two of us for a while now." Mark smirked, tilting his glass. "Guess that means someone's already had the first run." Her heart froze. The words hit like a slap. She blinked, not sure she'd heard right. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" He chuckled, raising both hands as if it were harmless. "Relax, I'm joking. It's just, most guys don't sign up to play stepdad, you know? That's just reality. Used goods and all, used goods." The phrase echoed in her chest, louder than the music, louder than the chatter around them. For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. She could feel the sting of humiliation rising to her face, her throat tightening. Her fork slipped against the plate, the sound sharp enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. Conversation slowed. Someone whispered. She wanted to leave, to disappear, but shame pinned her to the chair like an anchor. Then, from across the restaurant, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Maybe you should rethink your words, friend." Emily turned, startled. A man had stood up from a nearby table, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in rolled-up sleeves and worn jeans. A little girl sat beside him, her crayons paused mid-coloring. His eyes, calm but firm, were locked on Mark. Mark scoffed. "Excuse me? Do I know you?" The man didn't answer him right away. He looked at Emily, his tone gentle but steady. "Are you okay, ma'am?" She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She nodded instead, blinking back tears. The stranger, whose name she would soon learn was Jack Turner, turned back to Mark. His voice carried across the room, low but resolute. "You've got every right to your opinions," Jack said. "But there's a little girl here learning how men are supposed to talk. Maybe think about what kind of example you're setting." The restaurant fell silent. Mark's smirk faltered, his face hardening. "I was just being honest." Jack's expression didn't change. Honesty without kindness is cruelty. The weight of his words hung between them, raw and powerful. For the first time that night, Emily didn't feel invisible. Someone, a complete stranger, had stood up for her. And as Mark grabbed his coat and muttered that the night was a waste, Emily exhaled, her hands trembling. Jack met her eyes once more. "Don't let people like that define your worth," he said quietly. "They only show you what they lack." Emily wanted to thank him, but her voice still trembled with disbelief. Beside him, his little girl tugged on his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy." "Can she sit with us?" Emily blinked, tears finally spilling. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt seen. As Emily moved to join the stranger and his daughter, she didn't know it yet, but this quiet act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. Emily hesitated for a moment before walking toward Jack's table, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Every step felt uncertain, as if she were crossing an invisible line between shame and something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Jack motioned to the empty chair beside his daughter. "Please," he said gently. "You're welcome to sit with us if you'd like." Emily glanced around the restaurant. People were still watching, some with pity, others with quiet admiration. She lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I don't want to intrude." "You're not," Jack replied simply. "You've had a rough night. Everyone deserves a soft place to land once in a while." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. She finally sat down, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. The little girl looked up from her coloring book, a bright smile lighting her face. "I'm Sophie," she chirped. "This is my daddy. We're coloring rainbows. Want to help?" Emily couldn't help but laugh softly. "Hi, Sophie." "I'm Emily. I'd love to see your rainbow." Sophie held up her page proudly, a swirl of pinks and purples that spilled across the paper in wild, happy lines. "It's for Mommy," she said, then hesitated. "She lives in heaven now." The innocence in her words pierced something deep inside Emily. She looked at Jack, who met her gaze with quiet understanding. There was pain behind his eyes, but also a gentleness that softened it. "I'm sorry," Emily said softly. "She must have been wonderful." "She was," Jack replied, his voice steady but tender. "Cancer took her 3 years ago. Sophie was 4 then." Emily's heart ached. "That must have been so hard." Jack nodded. "Yeah, but it taught me a lot about strength, hers mostly. She used to say people who've been through storms see beauty in smaller things." His eyes met Emily's again. "I guess she was right." For the first time that night, Emily smiled. Not the polite, forced smile she'd been practicing for years, but something real. Fragile but real. They talked for nearly an hour after that. Jack told her stories about Sophie. How she insisted on naming their cat Mr. Pancakes. How she loved fireflies. How bedtime always ended with a story and a song. Emily found herself laughing, relaxing, forgetting the sting of what had happened earlier. She told him about Noah, how he loved soccer, how he once tried to make pancakes but ended up covering the kitchen in flour, how he slept with a stuffed dinosaur named Benny. Jack listened closely, smiling as if every detail mattered. "Your son sounds like a great kid," he said warmly. "You must be proud." "I am," she said, her eyes softening. "He's my reason for everything." Sophie tugged on Emily's sleeve. "Can I meet him someday?" she asked with that innocent curiosity only children have. Emily chuckled. "Maybe. I think he'd like you." As the night drew to a close, the tension that had once filled Emily's chest was replaced by something unfamiliar. Comfort. She hadn't planned on staying this long, hadn't planned on meeting someone like Jack, yet here she was, feeling lighter than she had in years. When they stepped outside, the savannah air was cool and sweet. Street lamps shimmered against the cobblestone, and the sound of a distant saxophone floated through the night. Jack walked beside her as she made her way to her car. "I'm sorry that guy said what he did," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Emily looked at him, the streetlight catching the kindness in his eyes. "Thank you for saying something. Most people would have just ignored it." Jack shrugged modestly. "I just didn't want Sophie growing up thinking that kind of talk was normal." She smiled faintly. "You're a good dad," he chuckled. "I'm trying." They reached her car, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. There was something heavy in the silence, not awkward but meaningful. Jack finally said, "You seem like someone who deserves more good days than bad ones." Emily's throat tightened. "That's kind of you." "It's true," he said simply. Then he nodded toward the street. "Maybe we'll bump into each other again." She watched him walk away, Sophie skipping beside him hand in hand. The sight left her strangely warm and a little breathless. Emily didn't know it yet, but that fleeting night, under Savannah's quiet lights, would soon bloom into something neither of them had been searching for, yet both desperately needed. 2 weeks passed, yet Emily couldn't shake that night from her mind. The way Jack had spoken up for her, not with anger but with calm strength, had left a quiet mark on her soul. It wasn't just that he defended her, it was that he saw her, really saw her when she had long felt invisible. Life returned to its rhythm. She worked her morning shifts at the clinic, studied for her nursing courses in the evenings, and spent her nights helping Noah with homework. But sometimes, when the house was silent, she'd find herself replaying that moment in the restaurant. The look in Jack's eyes, the kindness in his tone, the tiny voice of Sophie asking, "Can she sit with us?" Then one Saturday afternoon, fate decided to intervene. Emily was sitting in a small cafe near Forsyth Park, sipping her coffee while Noah devoured a blueberry muffin. He was talking excitedly about a soccer game coming up next week, when a familiar laugh drifted across the room. She froze, the sound tugging at her memory. Warm, genuine, unmistakable. Turning her head, her breath caught Jack. He was standing in line near the counter, holding Sophie's hand. The little girl was animatedly explaining something about chocolate milk, her curls bouncing with every word. Jack smiled down at her, patient and gentle, and Emily felt that same unexplainable warmth from before. Before she could decide whether to wave, Sophie spotted her first. "Daddy." "That's Miss Emily," she squealed, pointing toward their table. Jack turned, surprise flashing across his face, followed by a grin that felt like sunlight. He walked over, Sophie practically skipping beside him. "Well," he said with a small chuckle, "seems Savannah's smaller than it looks." Emily laughed softly, a touch nervous but happy. "Guess it is. Hi, Sophie." "Hi." The girl beamed, climbing onto the empty chair across from Noah. "This must be your son." Noah looked puzzled at first, but smiled when she giggled. "Oh yeah, I'm Noah." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Emily said quickly. "Please, join us." They ordered another round of coffee and muffins, and before long the four of them were laughing like old friends. Noah and Sophie bonded instantly over their mutual love for cartoons and pancakes, while Jack and Emily exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. "So," Jack said, sipping his coffee, "how's life treating you lately?" Emily smiled faintly. "Busy, but I'm making it work. Noah keeps me on my toes." Jack nodded approvingly. "You're doing great." "I can tell." The simplicity of his words disarmed her. Most people offered pity when they learned she was a single mother. Jack offered respect. For the next hour, the cafe became its own small world, the hum of conversation fading around them, the scent of roasted coffee grounding them in the moment. Emily hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd laughed this easily. When it was time to leave, Sophie hugged Noah goodbye. "We're going to the park," she said cheerfully. "You guys should come." Emily looked at Jack, uncertain. "We don't want to intrude on your day," Jack smiled. "It's not intruding if we want you there." So they went. Under the sprawling oaks of Forsyth Park, the children ran ahead while the adults followed behind, their laughter echoing through the green. They talked about music, about loss, about the strange ways life breaks you only to lead you to people who help you heal. Jack told her about his late wife, about how he'd spent years learning how to smile without guilt. Emily shared how she'd learned to build a life out of pieces she didn't think could fit anymore. Somewhere between shared stories and quiet pauses, something began to shift. Emily no longer saw Jack as just the man who stood up for her that night. She saw him as a father, as a survivor, as someone whose heart had also been bruised, yet still beat with kindness. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in amber and rose, Noah and Sophie ran toward the fountain, chasing pigeons and giggling uncontrollably. Jack turned to her then, his voice soft. "You know," he said, "sometimes the right people show up when you've stopped looking." Emily looked up at him, eyes reflecting the fading light. "Do you really believe that?" He nodded. "I do." That evening, as they said goodbye under the glowing street lamps, Emily realized something she hadn't in years. Her heart was beginning to wake up again. But she had no idea how deeply this awakening would soon change everything. Days turned into weeks, and the chance meeting at the cafe slowly grew into something familiar, something Emily hadn't realized she missed. It began with small things. A text from Jack asking how Noah's soccer game went. A photo from Emily of Sophie's latest crayon masterpiece that she'd drawn for Miss Emily. Then, weekend coffee turned into Sunday park walks, and Sunday walks turned into late evening talks that neither of them wanted to end. Their friendship unfolded naturally, quietly, like the tide rolling over sand. No grand declarations, no promises, just steady warmth that grew stronger with each shared laugh and each unspoken look. One Saturday morning they met again at the park. Sophie was chasing bubbles Noah was blowing, both of them squealing with laughter that drew smiles from passers-by. Emily sat on the bench beside Jack, watching the children play. "You've got a great kid," Jack said, sipping from his coffee cup. Emily smiled, eyes following Noah as he tried to catch a bubble mid-air. "He's my everything. Sometimes I still can't believe it's just me raising him." Jack looked at her, his expression gentle. "You're doing an incredible job." He's happy, you can see it. Her chest tightened with gratitude. "Thank you. That means more than you know." For a moment they sat in silence, letting the sounds of the park fill the space. Children laughing, leaves rustling, distant music from a street performer. Jack's voice broke the quiet. "You know, after my wife passed, I didn't think I'd ever get used to quiet again. The house felt too big, too empty." Emily turned to him, listening closely. "I tried to fill it with noise," he continued. "TV, work, anything. But nothing helped. Then one night Sophie came into my room, crawled into bed and said, 'Daddy, I don't want quiet. I just want you.' That was the first night I slept without feeling hollow." Emily's eyes glistened. "She's lucky to have you." He shook his head softly. "No, I'm lucky to have her." There was a long pause before Emily spoke again. "I used to think being alone meant I'd failed somehow, that maybe love just wasn't for people like me. But lately, I don't know. Feels different, lighter." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe because you stopped blaming yourself." Her breath caught. It was such a simple thing to say, but the truth in it hit deep. For so long she'd carried guilt she never deserved, for the marriage that broke, for the life that didn't go as planned. Hearing someone see through that made her feel... Noon. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking beneath the oak trees, talking about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed like music, unforced, honest. She learned that Jack was an architect who worked from home to be with Sophie more. He learned that Emily dreamed of one day opening a small community clinic for single parents. "Sounds like you've got a heart for helping," he said warmly. Emily smiled. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to need help and not get it." The way he looked at her then, steady, admiring, almost reverent, made her heart flutter. It wasn't romantic in the dramatic movie scene way. It was quiet, real, the kind of connection that feels safe. As the sun began to set, Noah ran up holding Sophie's hand. "Can we get ice cream?" he pleaded, eyes wide with that innocent urgency only kids could master. Jack chuckled. "Only if you promise to share with us." They walked to a nearby stand, each ordering a cone. The children's laughter filled the air, their smiles sticky with melted chocolate. Emily caught herself laughing too, not the cautious laughter she gave to fill silence, but a sound full of life. Later, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Emily turned to Jack. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't expect any of this." "Any of what?" he asked. She hesitated. "To feel at peace again, to meet someone who makes the world feel softer." Jack's gaze lingered on her face for a moment. "Maybe peace isn't found," he said quietly. "Maybe it's shared." The air between them stilled, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily felt her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but hope. As they said goodnight, Jack smiled. "Next weekend, same spot?" Emily nodded. "I'd like that." He walked away, holding Sophie's hand. Emily stood there for a moment, watching them disappear into the amber glow of dusk, her pulse still fluttering. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, Emily realized she was no longer haunted by the cruel words of her past, but drawn toward the kindness of someone who made her believe in love again. Yet the heart, once broken, doesn't trust easily, and hers was about to be tested. The days that followed felt lighter than anything Emily had known in years. Her morning started with sleepy laughter from Noah, and sometimes a good morning text from Jack that made her smile before she even brushed her hair. Their friendship had slipped quietly into something deeper, something tender, though neither dared to name it. But love, no matter how gentle, always finds a way to test the heart. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. Rain drizzled against the clinic windows as Emily finished her shift. She was supposed to meet Jack and Sophie for dinner later, their usual Thursday treat, but the receptionist called in sick, leaving Emily to stay late. She texted Jack an apology. Emily, running late tonight. Might not make it to dinner. Tell Sophie I owe her ice cream this weekend. Minutes later, his reply came, Jack, no worries. Get home safe. Rain's getting heavy. It was sweet, simple, but something about the message felt distant. She brushed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. But when she finally left the clinic an hour later, soaked and shivering, she drove past a small Italian place downtown, and through the glowing window, she saw him, Jack. He was sitting at a corner table with a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, blonde, elegant, her hand resting casually near his coffee cup. They were talking, laughing. The sight hit Emily like a punch to the chest. Her heart clenched, her thoughts spiraling. Maybe I was just a comfort. Maybe I read too much into everything. She didn't stop the car. She couldn't. By the time she got home, Noah was already asleep. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at her phone, waiting for a message that never came. The next morning, Jack texted again. Jack, you okay? You never replied last night. Emily hesitated before typing back, Emily, I'm fine. Just tired. She hit send before she could change her mind. For 2 days, they didn't talk much. The silence grew heavier than she expected. She told herself it was fine. They weren't anything official, but her heart betrayed her logic. Then, on Saturday, Jack showed up at her doorstep. She blinked in surprise when she opened the door. He stood there in the golden light holding a small paper bag. Sophie insisted we bring Noah his favorite cookies, he said with a sheepish smile. Hey, Emily managed, her voice tight. That's nice of you. Jack studied her face. You okay? You've been quiet lately. She tried to smile, but her voice wavered. Just busy. You know life, Emily, he said softly. Talk to me. Her walls cracked a little. I saw you, she blurted out. At Giovanni's with someone. Jack blinked, caught off guard. Then his expression softened with understanding. Oh, that was Megan, an old colleague. She's moving to Chicago next week. It wasn't, Emily cut in, her words sharper than she meant. You don't owe me an explanation. We're just friends, right? The hurt in her tone hung in the air like static. Jack stepped closer, his voice low. Is that really what you want us to be? She looked away, blinking fast. It's safer that way. He nodded slowly, pain flickering behind his eyes. Maybe, but safe doesn't always mean right. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sophie appeared behind him, holding Noah's hand, the two of them grinning about something only they understood. Emily forced a smile. Come in, she said softly. They spent the afternoon baking cookies and watching cartoons. The children's laughter filled the room, masking the silence between the adults. Every glance between Emily and Jack carried what neither dared to say. As the sun began to dip, Jack helped Sophie with her coat. Before leaving, he turned to Emily. For what it's worth, he said quietly, there's no one else I'd rather share Thursdays with. Her throat tightened, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. When the door closed, she stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. Noah tugged her sleeve. Mom, are you sad? She smiled faintly, forcing the ache away. No, sweetheart. Just thinking, but she was lying. Not to him, but to herself. That night, as rain began to fall again outside her window, Emily realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of losing someone she hadn't even admitted she loved yet. The next week felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace but from absence. Jack hadn't texted since that awkward afternoon, and Emily hadn't reached out either. Every time she picked up her phone, her fingers froze over the screen. What could she even say? I miss you. I'm sorry for overreacting. Both felt too fragile, too revealing. At night, she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Noah's soft breathing down the hall. And sometimes she'd think about that first night in the restaurant, the moment Jack stood up for her. It had felt like a spark in a dark room. Now that same room felt dim again. By Friday, she finally decided to stop waiting. She dressed Noah for school, grabbed her purse, and drove to the park where she and Jack usually met with the kids. The oak trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. She sat on the bench sipping coffee, pretending not to look for him. But every sound, every laugh, every footstep made her heart jump. Then finally she saw him. Jack walked toward her, holding Sophie's hand. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept well either. Their eyes met briefly, and that small look, awkward, searching, carried everything words couldn't say. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied. Giving a small nod, Sophie spotted Noah across the playground and ran to him instantly, shouting his name. Within seconds, their laughter filled the air again, as if the world hadn't changed. But Emily and Jack both knew it had. Jack sat beside her, his voice low. "Been a weird week," she nodded. "Yeah, it has." A pause stretched between them, the kind that begged to be filled with truth. Finally, Jack exhaled. "I wasn't lying, Emily. That dinner with Megan, it was nothing. She was an old friend saying goodbye. But I should have told you that. I didn't realize it would hurt you." Emily's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to sound jealous, I didn't expect it to hurt either." He looked at her then, really looked. "It hurt because you care." Her eyes glistened. "Maybe I do." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of children laughing in the distance. Jack's voice broke the quiet. "You know what I realized this week? When my wife died, I promised myself I'd never let anyone matter that much again. Because when you lose something that close, it changes how you breathe. But then I met you, and suddenly, I was breathing differently again." Emily blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Jack," he shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." She took a shaky breath. "You're not the only one who made promises. After my ex left, I told myself I'd never let another man make me feel small or uncertain again. Then you came along, kind, patient, and I got scared, because it felt too good to be true." Jack's expression softened, and for the first time in weeks he smiled, not the polite kind, but the one that reached his eyes. "Maybe we both broke our promises in the best way possible." Emily laughed quietly through her tears. "Maybe we did." They sat there for a long time, just watching the kids play. Sophie twirling in the grass, Noah pretending to guard an imaginary soccer goal. It was such an ordinary scene, and yet it felt extraordinary. When the children came running back, breathless and happy, Sophie tugged at her dad's sleeve. "Daddy, can we all have lunch together, please?" Jack looked at Emily. "Only if her mom says yes." Emily smiled, a real smile this time. Her mom would love that. Later at the cafe, laughter came easily again. The tension that had once lingered was gone, replaced by something quieter, deeper, understanding. As they walked out, Jack reached for her hand. For a moment she hesitated, then she let him take it. The world seemed to slow around them, every step sinking like two heartbeats finding the same rhythm. That night, as the sky melted into twilight and Emily's hand still tingled from his touch, she realized the truth she'd been running from. Love doesn't arrive when you're ready for it. It arrives when you've learned how to survive without it. And now it was time to stop surviving and start living. The weeks that followed unfolded like a slow sunrise, gentle, golden, full of quiet beginnings. Emily and Jack no longer tiptoed around what they felt. There were no confessions, no grand gestures, just small, honest moments that built something unshakable between them. Morning texts turned into evening walks turned into family dinners. Sophie and Noah sitting side by side, trading crayons and secrets, while the grown-ups stole glances that said, "I'm glad you're here." It wasn't perfect. Some days Emily still fought doubt. Some nights Jack still looked at old photos of his late wife, wondering if it was okay to feel joy again. But love, real love, didn't erase the past. It made peace with it. One crisp autumn afternoon, they all met at Forsyth Park for a picnic. The air smelled faintly of pine and roasted peanuts from a nearby cart. Sophie chased leaves while Noah pretended to be a superhero, his laughter echoing across the open field. Jack sat beside Emily on a checkered blanket, watching their children. "You ever think," he said softly, "that maybe everything broken in our lives happened just to lead us here?" Emily smiled, eyes on the children. "I used to think the opposite. That pain only took things from me. But maybe it was also giving me something I wasn't ready to understand." Jack turned toward her. "Like what?" She looked at him then, really looked. "Like the courage to love again." He reached over, taking her hand, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. The warmth between them was steady, familiar, the kind that didn't demand attention. Only trust. They stayed there, surrounded by the hum of life, watching as Sophie twirled with her arms wide open, shouting, "Look, Daddy, I'm flying." Jack laughed. "She gets that from her mother," he said, his voice touched with both ache and pride. Emily squeezed his hand. "And from her father, the one who still teaches her how to be brave." He looked at her, eyes soft. "You know you're brave too. You walked through hell and still showed up for life." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Maybe we both did." As the day faded into dusk, the sky turned shades of honey and rose. Streetlights began to flicker on, and the sound of a distant saxophone drifted through the park, the same tune that had played the night they first met. Jack stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Emily laughed, startled. "Here now?" He grinned. "Why not?" So she stood barefoot on the grass and let him pull her close. His hand rested lightly at her waist, hers over his heart. They swayed slowly, the world blurring into color and sound around them. People walking by smiled at the sight. Two souls who had once been strangers, now moving in quiet rhythm under the fading light. Emily rested her head against his shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think love meant finding someone to fix me. But now I see. It's finding someone who reminds you you're already whole." Jack's breath caught. "Then I guess we found it, later that night." After tucking the children into bed, Noah with his dinosaur plush and Sophie with her rainbow drawing, Emily and Jack sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, the crickets singing softly around them. The stars shimmered above the savannah rooftops. And for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel the ache of what she'd lost, only gratitude for what she'd found. Jack turned toward her, his tone tender. "Emily, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" He smiled faintly, hesitant but sure. "Nothing big, just if you'll keep sharing Thursdays with us forever." She laughed, tears glinting in her eyes. "That's the easiest yes I'll ever give." He leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "You're not someone's second choice," he whispered. "You were always meant to be my first miracle." Her breath trembled, and for a heartbeat, time stood still. The porch light glowed behind them, soft and golden, like the world itself was exhaling peace. Down the hall, the children's quiet laughter faded into sleep. Outside, the city hummed, alive and forgiving. And under the stars, two hearts that had once been shattered found a home in each other. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fate. Sometimes it simply walks into your life on an ordinary night, stands up for you when no one else does, and teaches you that even after everything breaks, the heart still remembers how to shine.